The world was not what it once had been. Once a bustling, beautiful planet, Earth now lay under the shadow of the Zephyr, an alien race with unmatched technology and power. They had come with fire and fury, destroying everything in their path. The human race, the last hope for survival, fought back with everything they had left. Captain Elena Voss was one of the last leaders of the human resistance. She had seen it all: the destruction, the deaths of close friends, the collapse of cities, and the endless struggle to stay alive. But she had also seen something else: the will of humanity to fight, to resist. It was a fire that burned inside her, a fire that refused to go out. Elena and her small group of soldiers were hiding out in the ruins of a once thriving city. The building they had taken shelter in was a hollow shell of what it used to be, filled with broken walls and shattered windows. They had no choice but to fight or die. Supplies were running low, and they were surrounded on all sides by the Sci-Fi. "How much longer can we hold out?" Sergeant Jacob Turner asked, his voice thick with pain. His leg was badly wounded from a recent battle, and he could barely move without grimacing. But there was no time to tend to it properly. The Sci-Fi were closing in, and the humans had no choice but to prepare for one last stand. "We'll hold on as long as we can," Elena said, her voice firm but with a note of worry that even she couldn't hide. "We can't give up, not now, not ever." Jacob gave a small nod, though he knew the chances of survival were slim. The resistance was outnumbered, outgunned, and the Zephyr were growing stronger every day. There was only so much hope left to cling to. The others in the group were trying to patch up their equipment and gather what little ammunition they had. The building they were in was not safe, but it was the best they could do for now. Elena walked from soldier to soldier, offering encouragement, giving orders, and preparing for the fight ahead. "Captain," a voice called from behind her. It was Lieutenant Samara, one of the younger soldiers who had only recently joined the resistance. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she was doing her best to stay calm. "The Zephyr are coming. They're just outside the city. We won't be able to hide for much longer." Elena turned, her eyes hardening with resolve. "We don't need to hide. We need to fight. They think they can crush us, but we will show them they are wrong." As the group prepared to make their final stand, Elena couldn't help but glance at Jacob. He was sitting against a broken pillar, his face twisted in pain, but his eyes never left the ground. He was the strongest soldier she had, but even he couldn't do much in his current state. Elena knew they needed him, but the wound in his leg was severe. There was no telling how long he could keep fighting. The sound of alien footsteps grew louder. The Sci-Fi were closing in. It was time to act. The Sci-Fi commander, a towering figure in dark armor, stepped forward, his cold eyes scanning the human resistance. His alien soldiers flanked him, ready to attack. There was no mercy in the Zephyrs' eyes. To them, humans were nothing more than pests to be crushed underfoot. "Captain Voss," the Zephyr commander's voice echoed through the ruins. "Your resistance ends here. Surrender now, and your lives will be spared. Fight, and you will die. It is as simple as that." Elena stood tall, her expression fierce. She could feel her heart racing, but there was no fear. Only anger and determination. "We will never surrender," she replied, her voice cold and steady. "We are humans. You may think you have won, but you haven't. Not yet." With a signal from Elena, the human fighters opened fire, unleashing a barrage of bullets and explosives at the advancing Sci-Fi. The aliens returned fire, their energy weapons lighting up the night. The ground shook with the force of the blasts, and the air was filled with the sounds of war. Elena and her team moved swiftly, using the wreckage of the ruined city for cover as they engaged in battle with the Sci-Fi. The fight was fierce, each side giving no quarter. The humans were outgunned, but they fought with everything they had. In the middle of the battle, Elena caught sight of Jacob. He was still holding onto his weapon, but his movements were sluggish. His injured leg was making it harder for him to fight, but he refused to fall back. He had always been one of the strongest soldiers, but even he was feeling the weight of the fight. Elena sprinted to his side, dodging blasts and diving behind cover. "Jacob," she called out, her voice filled with urgency. "You need to fall back. Your leg is too injured. I can't lose you here." Jacob looked up at her, his face pale from pain, but his eyes were steady. "I'm not leaving, Captain, not now. Not when we're so close to winning. I'll hold them off. Just keep pushing forward." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't want to lose him, but she knew he was right. They couldn't afford to lose anyone. With a nod, she turned and ran back into the fray, hoping Jacob could hold on for just a little longer. The battle raged on for hours, with neither side giving up. But as the hours passed, it became clear that the humans were losing ground. The Scifi had superior firepower, and their soldiers were trained to handle everything the humans threw at them. Elena could feel the weight of defeat pressing down on her shoulders. It was hard to see a way out. Then, as if answering her silent prayer, something unexpected happened. Jacob, who had been fighting through the pain of his wound, stood up. The expression on his face was strange, focused almost, otherworldly. Elena's eyes widened as she watched him. She had no idea how he was still standing, let alone still fighting, but there was no time to question it. Jacob had done something that made his wound disappear. He was healing at an incredible speed, and the light in his eyes had changed. It was as if something inside him had unlocked, something that had been dormant for a long time. Without warning, Jacob charged toward the Scifi commander, his movements fast and precise. Elena could hardly keep up with him as he moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, knocking down enemy soldiers left and right. His leg, which had once been injured and weak, was now stronger than ever. The Scifi commander watched in disbelief as Jacob approached. The alien tried to strike, but Jacob dodged effortlessly, his speed almost too fast to follow. With a swift motion, Jacob slammed into the commander, sending him crashing to the ground. Elena stood in shock, unable to believe what she was seeing. Jacob stood over the fallen commander, breathing heavily but with a grin on his face. "I think it's time to show them what humanity is truly capable of." The battle outside the Scifi fortress raged with even greater intensity. The human resistance, once on the edge of total defeat, had been given new life. Jacob Turner, the injured soldier who had defied all expectations, now stood at the heart of the fight, his body glowing with a strange, powerful energy. The Scifi commander lay at his feet, knocked out cold by the force of Jacob's surprise attack. Elena watched in disbelief as Jacob's form seemed to shimmer with an ethereal glow, his once wounded leg now fully healed. It was as though the very core of his being had shifted, unlocking some unknown power. His eyes were no longer filled with pain or fear. Now they burned with a fierce, unyielding determination. What just happened? Elena muttered under her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Jacob turned to her, his expression one of pure confidence. "I don't know, but I think we've just begun to show them what we're capable of." His voice was steady, his words carrying the weight of someone who had finally discovered his true potential. The Scifi forces, once so sure of their victory, were now shaken. They watched in stunned silence as Jacob approached, each step filled with power. The human resistance, inspired by Jacob's sudden transformation, fought with renewed energy. The Scifi soldiers, though highly trained, hesitated. They had never seen anything like this before. "Elena," Jacob said, his voice low but filled with purpose. "We can't waste any more time. We need to get to the heart of their operation, the central command ship. That's where they're controlling everything." Elena nodded, still trying to wrap her mind around the changes in Jacob. She had fought beside him for years, but what he was now seemed impossible. Yet here he stood, the key to humanity's survival. She could feel the momentum shift as her soldiers rallied behind Jacob, ready to fight like never before. The remaining Scifi soldiers tried to regroup, but their numbers were thinning and their morale had been shattered. Jacob's very presence seemed to drain the confidence from them. The humans, on the other hand, felt unstoppable. They had been fighting for so long, but now it felt like they were finally in control of their fate. As they moved toward the Scifi's central command ship, the group passed through the remains of the city. The buildings, once filled with life, were now hollow shells, scarred by years of war. It was a reminder of everything they had lost. But now they fought not just to survive, but to reclaim their future. The central command ship loomed ahead, an enormous dark structure floating above the ruined city. It was heavily guarded, but Jacob's newfound abilities made him the perfect weapon against their defenses. The closer they got, the more the Scifi forces scrambled to stop them. Their advanced technology, once their greatest strength, was now proving to be ineffective against Jacob's power. "We're getting closer," Elena said, her voice filled with determination. She could see the fear in the eyes of her soldiers. They had been pushed to the edge, but now, with Jacob leading them, they knew they had a chance. "Let's end this," Jacob replied. "For Earth," The group reached the base of the command ship where a group of Scifi elite soldiers stood guard. They were heavily armored, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. But none of them were prepared for what was about to happen. Jacob stepped forward, his movements smooth and fluid, his energy radiating outward. The Scifi soldiers raised their weapons, but before they could fire, Jacob was upon them. With a speed that seemed impossible, he dodged their attacks, moving so quickly that the alien soldiers could barely track his movements. In a matter of seconds, he had disarmed and incapacitated them all. Elena watched in awe as Jacob continued to dismantle the Scifi soldiers. His strikes were precise and powerful, and it was clear that he was no longer the same person he had been. The glow around him intensified, and for the first time, Elena understood that this was more than just strength. It was something deeper, something connected to the very essence of what it meant to be human. "Clear the way," Jacob called to his team, his voice steady as ever. "We're taking this ship down." The resistance fighters quickly moved into position, following Jacob as they entered the command ship. The interior was like nothing they had seen before. The walls were made of a strange metal that seemed to hum with energy, and the air was thick with the buzzing sound of alien technology. Jacob led the charge, his glowing form lighting the dark corridors as they moved deeper into the ship. The Scifi, despite their superior technology, had never encountered a force like this. They had underestimated the power of humanity's will to survive, and now they were paying the price. The deeper they went, the more resistance they encountered. The Scifi commanders sent wave after wave of elite soldiers to stop them, but Jacob was unstoppable. He moved through them like a force of nature, his body a blur as he tore through the opposition. Every strike was decisive, every movement calculated. The resistance fighters, inspired by Jacob's power, fought with renewed vigor. It wasn't just about strength anymore, it was about unity. The humans, who had once been divided and broken, were now working together as one, and with Jacob leading them, they were no longer afraid. Finally, they reached the heart of the command ship, the control center. It was a vast room, filled with advanced technology that controlled the Scifi's operations on Earth. The air was thick with the hum of power, and the walls were lined with monitors displaying the status of the Scifi forces around the planet. But Jacob wasn't afraid. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on the central console. "This ends now," he muttered under his breath. With a single powerful movement, he raised his hand. The room seemed to vibrate as his energy surged, crackling with power. The monitors flickered and the walls groaned as if they were alive. Jacob's energy was so intense that it seemed to warp the very fabric of the ship's systems. Elena watched in awe as Jacob reached out, touching the central console. The moment his hand made contact, the entire ship began to shake. Sparks flew from the walls and the lights flickered as the control systems overloaded. The Scifi commanders outside the room tried to react, but it was too late. With one final powerful burst of energy, Jacob tore the control center apart. The walls of the ship cracked and splintered as the entire command system was destroyed. The Scifi, cut off from their control systems, were now vulnerable. Their forces began to fall apart as their technology failed them. The battle was over. The Scifi had lost. Epilogue. Jacob stood in the wreckage of the Scifi command ship, his chest rising and falling with each breath. His body, still glowing with an otherworldly energy, began to settle. He looked out over the ruins of the ship, his heart heavy with the weight of what had just happened. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Behind him, Elena and the other resistance fighters stood, their faces filled with awe and respect. They had all seen what Jacob was capable of, but none of them had ever imagined such power. They had fought for years, but it was Jacob who had finally brought them victory. Jacob turned to Elena, a faint smile on his lips. "It's not over yet," he said. "But we've won this battle, and that's enough to keep fighting for." The humans had won, but now they were ready for what came next. They were no longer the oppressed. They were no longer the weak. They were humanity, and they were ready to take back the stars.